To our very much awaited keynote speech on principles and policies to respond to this dangerous time we're living in. And I'm really thrilled to announce our keynote speaker, Mr. Jonathan Granoff, the president of the Global Security Institute, also trustee of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. Mr. Granoff is also a senior advisor and United Nations representative of the Permanent Secretariat of the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates, signatory to the Global Peace Offenses. So, Mr. Granoff, the floor is yours, and you will later also take part in a very interesting debate. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I want to thank the two distinguished organizations of science and art, the World Academy and the European Academy. Particularly want to thank the Alma Mater University for convening us. And I want to get right into it. But before I do that, I want to get a picture of you guys. So just put your most beautiful faces on and shine so I can share this with lots of people when I get home. Thank you. Because it doesn't matter like what I say if it doesn't communicate something and spark something in you. So I want to get right off from listening to what I've been hearing, something that I hadn't planned on talking about, but I want to start out with some basic facts that really mean a lot to me. And I hope it means a lot to you. 50% of the human population owns less than 2% of the world's wealth. That means there are mothers today deciding which one of their children will have enough calories to live the next week. That's a reality. 0.001% of the world's population owns 3 times the wealth of the bottom 50%, almost 4 billion people, owned by 0.0001%. Last year, over $2.5 trillion was spent in armaments. My country spent almost $1 trillion alone. But the statistics are that less than 318 billion would be needed to eliminate extreme poverty. So we don't really have a problem, a technical problem, in terms of taking care of billions of people right now. We don't have a problem of expanded knowledge. We have the technical capacity and we have the wealth. We hear people like Elon Musk talking about expanding consciousness. No, we need to expand conscience. We need to expand knowing the reality of what suffering is for so many people. And we need to talk about what it is to bring human security to people. We have so much security preoccupied with the security of states and institutions that we create. States. I mean, states are a fairly recent creation, created in the 1640s to stop people arguing over whose definition of Jesus' love was better, and they were slaughtering each other in massive numbers in Europe. And people got together to separate them. Got together to separate people. But today we have to figure out how do we work together. And that's called building trust. Building trust. The Cold War was ended because trust was built amongst people in both blocs. In an essay that George Shultz, the former Secretary of Defense of the United States, wrote reflecting on his life. And remember, he was one of the people committed to the abolition of nuclear weapons that put in motion the reduction of the arsenals by over 80% since the first summit in Geneva, in which the superpowers said a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. And then ended that paragraph saying, and neither party shall seek military advantage over the other. At the height of the Cold War, that was because they trusted each other. As he said, when trust was in the room, whatever room it was, the family room, the school room, the coach's room, the military room, good things happened. When trust was not in the room, good things did not happen. Everything else is the details. Trust is the currency of the realm for the security of our planet. When it breaks down, fear is amplified and exploited. Fear leads to armaments. Armaments reinforce fear, which becomes a descending spiral, a hazardous spiral that leads to dysfunctional, fear-driven, insane behavior. This process of this huge amount of money spent on finding ways to pursue security by building weapons, ironically, the more we perfect the weapon, the less security we get. What could be more insane than that? Is driven by a model of security called, or based on a Roman maxim: prepare for war, receive peace. And this leads to the continual pursuit of military advantage. So now we have 9 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, China, Russia, France, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, threatening all of us with over 13,000 nuclear warheads. And if less than 2% of that arsenal was used, it would throw at least 5 million tons of soot into the stratosphere, ending the agricultural base of civilization. So we've moved from mutually assured destruction, so that if any one of these nations uses their whole arsenal, to self-assured destruction. So we've moved from mad to sad. And that's where we are today. And the leaders of these countries are threatening these weapons. Now, there's another paradigm that we know of. The UN Charter is an achievement of the highest order. Before the UN Charter, there were many, many doctrines on how you conduct war, going back to the laws of Hammurabi, going back to the laws of Manu in South Asia, going back to the laws of what you can and can't do in a war that Muhammad laid out, many systems of the limitations in war. But the institution of war does not get condemned by law until the United Nations Charter. That's an enormous achievement. And it is unrealistic to think that the guardrails of international law can be ignored and have a sustainable future. Because the passions driven by fear, coupled with the technological capacity we have for destruction, is inevitably, by accident, design, or madness, going to end us all. And we cannot be ants on a log talking to each other, knowing full well that we're going to go over a waterfall. So we have to have another approach. We have to have an approach that says it's irrational to be destroying species at 1,000 times the evolutionary base rate. It's irrational to have a system of generating energy on the planet that's so adversely affecting the climate that we're going to affect the health of the oceans, which is 50% of our oxygen comes from phytoplankton. If I lose a lung or you lose a lung, we can live. But if the phytoplankton is injured, and it depends on the health of the oceans, our species dies. We ignore these facts at our peril. And the fact of these destructive behaviors is not coming because we don't have enough technical information. It's because we forgot the why. The why. The why. And this conference is so noteworthy because the why is about taking care of people. That's the why of the pursuit of knowledge. And that's why it is such a laudable endeavor that the alma mater university is hosting the Global Peace Offensive, because that is what is needed right now. It is both practical to take proactive engagement using all of the skills of the different disciplines of the world: science, diplomacy, law, culture, art, to look at how do we move toward a peaceful, coherent world. We don't know, there's no silver bullet, what a horrible analogy, silver bullet answer to that question. But we do know that the processes of engagement, dialogue, and addressing problems can lead to extraordinary solutions. And we do know some examples of things that actually work. For example, my colleague from the World Academy of Art and Science, Donato, has identified a whole list of methodologies that we've learned in the realm of diplomacy that work. For example, we know that sometimes graduated reciprocity in threat reduction, unilateral actions, characterized as weakness by the fools who deny our common humanity and demonize adversaries, works. So the United States, which I know very well, had a president with Richard Nixon who unilaterally said, we're going to destroy our biological weapons. We're not going to wait for others to do it. These weapons are morally reprehensible, and we have better ways of defending ourselves. And he started destroying the biological weapons program. 10 years later, there's a treaty banning biological weapons. And the adversary said, wait a minute, we can do the same. The Chemical Weapons Convention was similarly achieved. President George Bush Sr. unilaterally said, the United States is going to get rid of its chemical weapons. Not only will we get rid of threatening to use them, we're going to get possessing them and destroyed them. A full 10 years before the Chemical Weapons Convention was established. Now that happened also because I was part of a lawyers organization called Lawyers Alliance for World Security, and we went to the business community and said it would be good policy for you to distinguish and put a firewall between the peaceful uses of chemicals and the military uses. And we got the Chemical Manufacturers Association to say, we're going to put up that firewall. And the public loved it. We don't have such a firewall with the nuclear industry. We should, because there's a big difference between using the technology of nuclear technology to kill ourselves and to provide possibly safe, secure energy, if we can figure out what to do with the garbage. But the point is, science is not neutral. Science expresses values in action, and science has to be accountable to the arts of law and morality. The nuclear venture is the first horse out of the barn without those reins. We have to have those reins over AI, and as yet we don't. As yet we don't. All of the stress tests that have been done have shown that AI is not either fully understood nor under control yet. But that's another subject. In the 1960s, there was a woman, Juliet Hollister, who came up with the idea of a venue for she conceived of a place called the Temple of Understanding, in which all of the religious leaders of the world could come together to talk with each other and affirm the values of service, love, compassion, etc. That building never happened, but she started a movement of interfaith dialogue. And now, in all the major cities in the United States, I know very well, there are interfaith councils. It's normative. In Boston alone, there's 55 of them. There's an organization that I'm very active with called the United Religions Initiative, which has hundreds of thousands of groups all over the world, in which you need 7 people in the group of 3 different faith traditions addressing a problem collectively, because we've discovered that when people work together on a problem, they build trust with each other, and then all kinds of creativity happens in the atmosphere of trust. We heard some discussion about how you create innovation and an enabling environment. The best is when a group of people try to solve a problem collectively, in a trusting environment, creativity emerges, because that's the human condition. When you're in a caring environment, all kinds of amazing things happen. So this group, I'm in a group of this group of the United Religions Initiative, and it took us, by the way, it took us about 7 years to create this group. It was funded first to sort of create a parliament of the leadership of religions, but everyone decided we need to create a massive discussion on the planet, particularly amongst people that are not getting along. Like there's big groups in India and Pakistan of people talking to each other. Just like that lawyers group that I mentioned that I was part of, during the height of the Cold War, we had exchanges of lawyers from the then Soviet Union to come to the United States. We showed them jury trials. We showed them bankruptcy court. We showed them judges holding the state in contempt of court, holding the state to the rule of law. They became advocates of glasnost and perestroika, helping to end the Cold War. And lawyers that we sent from the United States to the then Soviet Union came back and said, oh my God, in Russia there are human families. They're not demonic. They're humans, and we can find a way of getting along. That kind of civil society, professional exchanges, whether it's in religion, in law, in art, works. In the height of the Cold War, behind the scenes, it's interesting, while both the United States and the Soviet Union were mutually demonizing each other, and this was a very dangerous period, much like we're in right now, behind the scenes, both countries were encouraging scientific cooperation to address the scourge of polio. They didn't tell the public about it because it would be politically unpopular, but it worked. So the scourge of polio has been addressed. We know we prevented it. We've pretty much wiped it out, largely because of that scientific cooperation. So there are many centers of the study of war. There are many colleges of the study of war. There are many interfaith initiatives, the Parliament of the World Religions, Religions for Peace, in almost every country of the world. But there are not very many centers for the study of peace. There are not many initiatives that say, let's coordinate these efforts, particularly the academic community, particularly the scientific study of how do we achieve peace, how do we build trust, how do we use all of the arts and skills that our humanities give us and the technical skills that science gives us, empirically driven knowledge, to work for peace. How do we have a peace offensive? How do we have a center devoted to that? Oxford University has for hundreds of years had a chair in war studies. It's done very well. I know people trying to create a chair in peace studies. But here, in this university, there's going to be a center for the singular purpose of studying and applying peace. And I hope many of you students avail yourself of this and engage in it and demand of your teachers, demand of your elders that they focus on giving you the skills to bring about a peaceful world for you and your children. I think we need a golden rule for today. When the golden rule was articulated, the highest moral standard that's taught everywhere in the world, whether it's refrain from harming others as you don't want to be harmed, or do unto others. When that was articulated, whether it was Confucius, Jesus, Muhammad, Socrates, you couldn't destroy the future. You couldn't. Even if you wanted to melt the polar ice cap, you couldn't do it. But today we're putting the future at risk. So I think one of the arts that we need is the art of ethics. And I think the ethical principle for the 21st century is treat the lives and well-being of future generations as we want to be treated. I own a house. I can paint it. I can sell it. I can rent it. Because I own it, I can destroy it. That's what property is. We don't have a property right for future generations. We don't have a right to use up the regenerative processes of nature for our own greeds and our own wants. We don't have that right. It's impractical and it's immoral. And that's what people care about. And the people don't understand the SDGs, which are articulation of this that support every country but 3 in the world, Haiti, Myanmar, and the United States right now. But it's a norm that says we know how to have a sustainable future. We have the technical expertise. We need the political will. And the political will needs, people need to say, this is morally the right thing to do. We need to take care of future generations. And that boils down to, it was interesting that one of the previous speakers referred to the Einstein-Russell Manifesto, and those are some of the same people that created the World Academy of Art and Science, and I'm sticking to my time here. And they ended their manifesto exactly on what this is about our humanity, about people, about the peace offensive. They said, there lies before us, if we choose, continued progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Well, wisdom is the application of compassion and love in action. Wisdom is not simply passive. Wisdom has to have life, or it devolves into mere sentiment. Shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death. I believe that the global peace offensive has the potential to stimulate and catalyze the voice of conscience in enormous numbers of people and organizations worldwide who truly believe that people have the will, knowledge, heart, and soul and passionate desire to live harmoniously. There's a powerful constituency sitting on the sidelines. There's a powerful alliance between people who care about a sustainable environment and people who care about peace and security. And anyone who looks into the eyes of their children or grandchildren can say, I have a responsibility to them. But nobody has been bringing them all together. So my colleague Donato has come up with this brilliant idea of a peace offensive. The potential of it is enormous. The need for it is clear. And the only way it's going to happen is by people engaging in it, raising the money, raising their energy, raising their passions, and engaging with each other at a global level. We now are in a time in which when we say we, it doesn't just mean, this is the conference on the status of women, and there's a portion of it in remembering Dr. Jane Goodall. And Dr. Jane Goodall, and I think I'm one of the few guys in this. I taped part of the memorial because I worked so closely with her. And I pointed out that when she said we, it didn't mean just human beings. It meant the whole web of life. And the fact is that if we die, the ants will do just fine, and so will the bees. But if the ants die, we have about 2 months to live. So when we make a commitment toward life, we have to include the web of life. And that's what we now know by science means we're but a thread in this web. And so our sense of connectivity to one another and to the web of life, that is what we have to work at. That's the technical knowledge that we need. And that's about us, human beings. Remember your humanity. That's first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Granoff. You're now invited to stay on stage. Yo. You're just like the Swiss watch. So, we have the fourth chair, and I'm really happy to announce a fantastic panel we'll hear now, which will be chaired by Mr. Donato Chiniger-Basili, the Vice President of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences and former UN Senior official. So what you need is that. What you also need are two more panel members.
There's two other panels.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to announce Ms. Thania Paffenholz, a scholar and policy advisor specialized in peace processes and political transitions, the founder of the Director on Inclusive Peace in Geneva, and last but not least, Mr. Dziatkowiec, Director of Mediation and Peace Support. And prior to that, he, for nearly a decade, has served as project manager in various roles at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, HD. And now to Mr. Donato Chiniger-Basili, the chair of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor, and thanks to everybody. The great advantage of speaking after Jonathan Granoff is that he has done the work already. I could step down, and the whole thing has been introduced to you very effectively, I believe. But we have what I call a sort of dream team today. These are the specialists that I really dreamt of bringing here after last year's experience. It was exactly a year ago that I was on this podium presenting you the peace offensive, the global peace offensive. Lots of things have happened, so I think we have to go back a bit in our recent history for those who were not here, for those who need to know a bit more about what the peace offensive is all about, and to see how we are going to roll it out. So this is what our dream team is going to do. By the way, Ambassador Stadler was supposed to be with us. She's the chief strategist of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, last minute, could not be there, would not be with us, but she's following us. So thank you, Sabina, for following, and we will engage with you at a later stage. Now, what is the peace offensive? It's a concerted effort to attain peace. It's, as we heard from before, is bringing humanity back to the center stage of conflict resolution through norms, through values, through culture, our culture, through traditions, through science and technology, through innovation, as we heard. This is all extremely important. We have to remember first about our humanity. We have to forget all the rest because it's part of us. It's part of us, our humanity, and our principle of collaboration in a pathway towards peace, bringing peace, establishing peaceful relations based on reciprocity, based even on concessions, as we heard from historical examples that Jonathan has brought before us. And in doing so, we can create a large coalition. We are just at the beginning of this process. Mind that, we are just at the beginning of this process. But the fact that three institutions, the World Academy of Art and Science, Alma Mater, our convening organization, and the European Academy of Science and Art came here, and in October 2024 first, they signed a visionary statement around this subject. Then later on, we developed a call for action around the same principles that I will present to you in a minute. And then, finally, not finally, but latest, the latest development, we also established a center for the global peace offensive. It's indicative of some progress towards our goal. Oops, I never know where to point. So, well, you know, I don't need to be evocative of what are the threats, the imminent threats, the existential threats in front of us. So I prefer to bring you instead an engraving of 1560 by Peter Bruegel the Elder. This is a metaphor of an unpredictable journey. 3 caravels in a rising squall, a violent storm at sea. You see the waves, you see the hidden rocks probably, the storm is coming. The shallow waters are a threat, and we need to find a new way, a new sailing course in order to avoid these threats in front of us. In our turbulent times, are we already in the eye of the storm? Or the eye of the storm is approaching. We need to know that. We need to remember ourselves of these imminent risks. And at the same time, we have to know that this is not just due to conflicts, it's also due to the relation that we have with nature. Nature can help us to obviate some of the problems, but we need to know what nature can offer. We know that 5 million of people die every year due to pollution, to the environmental pollution. So these are critical factors to be kept in mind. So as the old multilateral system of relations among states is faltering, a new international system is not yet in place. Hence, we need a new system. We have to work towards a new system. Peace, as we see in this engraving of 1560, is a long journey. And peace cannot be achieved just with weapons and is not achievable with the stroke of a pen, not to say with the deal-making approach of nowadays, with the real estate approach in agreements, or trying to make peace just, again, signing a document. Peace has to be cultivated. It is among people, and people have to take part in it. Now, these are the main pillars of the peace offensive, that it's about people. In recognition of the unprecedented threat to peace and human security, and in consideration of the political polarization, the growing violence that is not just physical violence, it's also ways people communicate to one another. It's the disregard for human dignity is therefore a disenchantment in general, also towards politics and political solutions. We have a collective responsibility. We need to reverse the direction, exercising our own way of convening around problems, around solutions, find solutions, concentrate around critical solutions, the scientific solutions that we heard from speakers in the previous panel. They can help those principles in terms of how to attain useful research, research that serves human beings, that serves our collective purpose. So for that reason, we have also to trying to enhance our human security, the basic needs that people have. Food, health, security in general, this is what people want. And this is really the essence of what we are promoting for our own security. We have to build bridges. We have to facilitate a dialogue, exercising a convening power around problems and solutions. So this is the dialogue-driven approach of our global peace offensive that is focused on identifying conflict de-escalation opportunities, on the future-oriented conversations that we can develop with change makers through even foresight exercises involving youth. Why not? Actually, you have to be on the forefront of our initiatives, with research, ad hoc research, preparatory research, and working on supporting grassroots, localized initiatives for peace building and coexistence, leveraging peace building and science, technology, identifying concerted actions and trust building, as Jonathan was saying, enhancing trust building and cooperation for human security. So our intent is to mobilize a collective response, weaving a network of participating individuals and organizations into our fold, in what we have already established. This is a campaign, is a social mobilization campaign. We have a call for action, I was saying, that we signed on the 14th of March 2025. And it's the three-pronged strategy, I can repeat this here, is here in these 3 points. Strategic de-escalation, problem-solving approach, trust building with mutual concessions, gradual, reciprocal initiative that can build trust among people, among parties. And then enhancing dialogue through collaborative, appreciative inquiry, appreciative relations among people, qualities, and what can people bring to the table in general. You know, there are even, now we speak a lot about artificial intelligence, but there are other forms of intelligence that are very prominent nowadays. Of course, augmented intelligence, but even generous intelligence. This is a term that I like a lot because it brings really touch really the heart of people. I mean, talking about what we can, in terms of intelligence, human intelligence, what are the points of contact between people, how we can integrate our thinking. We have also a tool nowadays we have developed for a diagnostic of what are the critical situations in the world, the hotspots. This helps us to crystallize the situation, to understand it, to explore it better, and to bring an understanding, a snapshot of critical situations, and refine it through elaborations, through thinking, through dialogue. There are multiple ways of representing reality. There is not only one. We have to accept the fact that people need a confrontation, but they need also to change opinions. They need to improve on their opinions, and science, technology can help around this theme. This is last September, we created the center, Global Peace Offensive Center, here in Maribor, thanks to Professor Ludwig Toplak, to the University of Maribor alma mater that is hosting us here, for research and dedicated to promoting lasting peace through civil society engagement. Jonathan said, yes, the Westphalia Agreement in 1600 is long gone. Now we have to find a new way of bringing people not to the table, because there are no tables anymore, but bring people to the discussions that improve human relations. This is the essence of our effort. And now, since this is a sort of recap of what we have achieved recently and what we have discussed, I was telling you I have this team of specialists that Igor, our Master of Ceremony, has already introduced. I will join you in a second, but please let me ask you first a general question. What can we do to expand this circle, to expand this peacemaking community? And where do you see gaps that we can fill at the present moment, and where the peace offensive can help address the various threats, that the existential threats that we are surrounded from? So the first to inaugurate this round of a debate is Thania Paffenholz. Thania, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for your introductions and inspiring words. Thank you to the people. I love this title. It's about people, and you have been so patient. And so we ask you for another round, and then please engage. We're going to have a lot of engagement. I'm very happy to be the first women speaker of the day. Just to mention. And I wanted to also, before I answer your question, give some positionality. I'm a peace researcher. What is that? Peace research has been founded in the 50s with an intentional goal. It was not just about researching conflict and peace, it was about changing the circumstances. And I think that's a crucial difference. It's an intentional science, and there has been a lot of conflict in the peace research community over the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. Should we be the serious researchers? Yes, we are very serious researchers. We are in international relations, we are also in peace research. But there has been a tension between, do we publish all our results in the journals and that's it, and we then hope one day it will evaporate to policy, or we are more practically engaged as well. And I think that has always been a tension, and I think I'm sort of somebody who's always been dancing between practice, policy, and research, because it's for me, research without sort of being connected is not very fulfilling. Okay, that's one thing. Then what you said in terms of what are the gaps. I think before we talk about what can the peace offensive very concretely contribute, we need to go back to what is the landscape. And I wanted to add to what Jonathan has said. We have a fundamental breaking point, a critical juncture in history. So as like the end of the Cold War, it's almost like that now, because in peace processes, what we have seen is the UN had a major role in bringing parties together, in running so-called comprehensive peace agreements, where you had like ending wars, but you had also substantial reconstruction architectures, how to shape new societies. And it has greatly failed. Let's be honest. Look at Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. Look at the prominent places where we had so-called missions. Why has it greatly failed? A million of reasons, but also it was not all about the people.
That's right.
And the people were also not included in their own solutions. So we had reached that stage where also a lot of critical peace researcher, where you would see tons of publications and PhDs on why the liberal peace-building enterprise has failed. In the middle of all this criticism and self-criticism comes a new culture, fixing the world through short-term deals. Of course, the US is on the forefront, but we have also the so-called new mediators. There's a lot of new countries in the scene of peacemaking, which is the Gulf states. It's Turkey, it's Kenya, it's South Africa, Brazil. So new actors come into, it's not only Czech, Switzerland, Norway, the EU. Suddenly we have so many more actors, and they're not collaborating. They're not under the roof of the UN or anything collaborative. They're doing their job, and their main goal is to end violence, which is a very noble goal. But the key challenge is, it's not enough to end the violence if we can't create sustainable structures, because the violence will repeat. Look at Gaza. We are in the phase of Plan A for Gaza, and the violence is already coming back. So this is a fundamental change. So now, if we talk about the peace offensive and what gaps it can fill, I think a fundamental question is, if it's about the people, what does it mean? Donato said human security. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's make that specific. Mm-hmm. So I'm working with a group of Ukrainians, civic leaders. They have high leadership positions in the civic world and in humanitarian world, and they're together since 2014, and their goal is to help end the war. But they came to me 2 years ago and said, we want that this peace negotiations that's going to happen will include human needs, that will understand the needs of people in the occupied territories, in Russia, in Ukraine. We want the people's needs to be included. We need a seat at the negotiation table. Get us there. You're the expert. I said to them, forget it. Why? Because the world has changed. I said 2 years ago, I have doubts if we're going to have a proper peace table. I have doubts whether even the Ukrainian government has a seat at the table. So what do you really want? If you want to change and influence what is going on, let's work on influencing. So what we have done in the last 2 years is taking human needs, what people need, formulating them into concrete recommendations and making the tour to Europe, to the US, and being invited on the highest level to present these results, and they have been included into Trump's peace plan. So it's quite a story of how you can still get the people's needs into high-level short-term deals in order to create the preconditions. There are points in of how can families be united, but there's also very political points like how can a peace architecture look like after the war, because these people have compared the lessons of the past, what has not worked, and what they think should work in the future. So there are all these things, and how does this work? It works because people are part of collective networks, what you said.
That's right.
And we did like, I call this like an influence mapping. You map out who do you know, who has contacts to who, get us to the White House and how. It's all possible. So peacemaking and peace building is about, and I think Professor Tola said at the beginning, it's fragile, but there's possibilities. And I think I'm a possibilist. I'm part of a group of people, we're all mediators and negotiators, and we have founded the League of Possibilists, which basically means we refuse to accept that something is not possible. It's always possible to end the war, it's always possible. And the other thing, this is my last point in this round, is you don't think you can just listen. No. You all need to engage, because we have to count on you. Yeah, because we are all old. You are the future, and that's why all of us need to find our space, how we can contribute. And the Peace Offensive will get a space for that too. Thank you.
I then would pass the floor, thank you, Thania. I mean, very inspiring and supportive at the same time. Now, I want to hear from Paul. Paul is, I would say, a traditional mediator in many ways.
Absolutely.
He's a diplomat, and he has gone through, various iterations of mediation processes, but he's also an innovator. And he has examples he can share with us also from recent ongoing negotiations. So what can the expanded circle that we're trying to define, what can we do to bring to fruition also science, also culture, and different actors into the traditional negotiations and mediation processes?
Thank you. Thank you, Donato. Thank you to the Alma Mater University, the World Academy of Art and Science, and the European Academy for Science and Art for having us here at the conference. So what can the Peace Offensive achieve? I go back to what Professor Toplak said at the beginning of our conference, that we're living in uncertain times, I would say even turbulent times. So old systems are faltering, even being actively undermined. And in the newly emerging systems, I think that there are serious gaps that traditional players will not be able to fill. And so it's time for fresh ideas, and it's time for innovation. Now, when it comes to peacemaking specifically in that international changing environment, some of our major challenges include the erosion of international norms that we thought were long established and universally accepted, the sidelining of multilateral institutions from peacemaking, as Thania just mentioned. Some of them were actually established in order to do peacemaking, and now they are being actively sidelined. And also the other worrying trend that Donato mentioned is this reach for quick fixes or transactional deals, what he termed real estate diplomacy, that we're seeing more and more of. So all of these things make peace processes less comprehensive and less inclusive. And it also means that fundamental reasons or issues at the center of conflicts are actually being overlooked, such as justice, for example, or at least not adequately addressed. And when that happens, there is always a greater danger that conflicts will relapse, they will come again. So in that context, this big space that has been left and traditional actors being sidelined, there is room for innovation and for new thinking, new voices. And that's where I think the peace offensive can have a role. If it can become a connector or a mechanism or platform for joining peace efforts with relevant constituencies affected by conflict. These are constituencies that are usually marginalized, even though they make up the majority of people affected by conflict. So women and youth and civil society, and I would add economic actors and the scientific community. And the reason I add those last two groups of people is because for me it's always been unusual that they bring so much in terms of ideas and innovations, but they are not generally in the peace talks. And we as mediators were always on the lookout for entry points, so openings where there may be a potential for finding common ground between the conflict parties. And these points of convergence come more easily where you can identify shared interests or common threats. And so that's where science comes in. And we heard about the Cold War. Jonathan was saying earlier that in the worst times of the Cold War, it was science diplomacy that kept alive some sort of thread of communication between the big adversaries. And who knows, maybe that was the only thread that stopped us from an even worse destiny. The fact that they were able to work together on issues that they believed were common threats, such as polio. The eradication of polio happened, in the darkest times of the Cold War, and also the repair of the hole in the ozone layer was collaboration. Primarily, not only, but primarily the Cold War adversaries coming together and determinedly addressing that shared threat. So science diplomacy has a tradition and it has a positive history. And these days I think it's a tool that is underutilized, underappreciated, but it's worth tapping into, and I think the peace offensive has a role in doing that. And, Donato asked me to pick
Antarctica. I want to know here about Antarctica and the Caucasus.
Okay, I would like to talk about Antarctica, but I know very little because I work on the Arctic, which is
that's right.
Similar,
that is right.
But very
That's
different.
Right.
If you know what I mean. Anyway, I run a dialogue process that focuses on the geopolitical confrontation in the Arctic. So that involves all of the relevant states that are competing or confronting each other in that region. There are a lot of important threats, risks in play in the Arctic. Accelerated climate change. Climate change happens 4 times faster in the Arctic than anywhere else. That has a lot of consequences, such as accelerated permafrost thaw, potential release of global health threats from the permafrost, biodiversity loss, all kinds of challenges related to the climate change. But then there's also, of course, the increased militarization of the Arctic. More than half of Russia's nuclear assets are actually based within the Arctic Circle. Also increasingly Western military assets. And in these times of lack of constructive diplomatic level engagement, it's important to have at least unofficial dialogue, which is what we do, on some of these issues, to make sure that there's not an unintended escalation or misunderstanding that could lead to confrontation. So among all these issues, sometimes the hardest ones to move are the political issues and the security issues. And you often get deadlock on those types of issues. And then you have to think about creative entry points. And it's the science often that comes up as a prospect. Because frankly, the scientific, the environmental consequences, they don't recognize borders, right? So they are mutually shared threats. You can't argue with the facts. And so the scientific community has a role in building bridges, sharing their mutual understanding and finding entry points where dialogue can still happen, even when on politics and on security there is deadlock. And so I've used this tool of science diplomacy in a number of different settings in our dialogue work, including in Ukraine, which I worked on for several years and had an ecological track, which was actually often the only one that had any momentum when the political and the security dialogues were at a standstill. And then in the Caucasus, there's a similar kind of dynamic where science actually keeps moving, and there is a potential for building trust based on commonly agreed facts, which you cannot deny are there. And there are other parts of the world where also science can be a sort of enabler or a trigger for some momentum in peace talks. So there's a couple of examples there, and also historically the Cold War has a lot of such examples that can inspire us in these times.
Can also be spoilers in certain cases. I mean, they can also create problems, but we have to appraise ourselves of all possibilities. Now is Jonathan. Jonathan,
okay.
You have your microphone.
I think I have a.
You still have that one. I also have it.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just give a couple of examples. But first, I think one of the values added that is needed is, by contrast, in my country, in the United States, if you're against abortion as a moral issue, and like no one's getting pregnant in order to have an abortion. It's not like some great event. But if you're passionately against abortion, statistically, you're likely to be for more money for the military, less money for schools. More money to weaponize space, and less money for healthcare. Now, that's weird. There's no natural coalition there. That's been, I call that an astroturfed coalition. It's not a grassroots coalition. But there are natural coalitions that have not been nurtured. People who care about a sustainable environment are the same people highly likely to care about fundamental human rights. People who care about fundamental human rights are more likely to care about nuclear nonproliferation and disarmament. People who care about nuclear nonproliferation and disarmament are more likely to see common interests amongst the nations of the world and the value of working together. I know that's true because one of the programs that's part of the Global Security Institute is Parliamentarians for Nuclear Nonproliferation and Disarmament, which is now in 80 countries with multiple parties. It's non-ideological, it's just focused on stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons and moving toward a safer world. And we have permanent observer status in the Interparliamentary Union, which is the organization of all the parliaments of the world. Because parliamentarians who are connected to the aspirations of people know that their people want to stop the spread of weapons of mass destruction. And the alliance is so easy and so natural. But no one has really, as a strategy, brought together all of the disparate, I call them the initiatives of virtue, that are natural grassroots alliances. That's not been done. And I've had some experience in a multi-level, multi-organizational alliance that was very successful called the Middle Powers Initiative. And I'll just describe it. And it was kind of like an idea that a brilliant strategist who was a diplomat and a senator from Canada, Douglas Roach, had, which was in the 1990s when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was indefinitely extended. Now that treaty is the third most important legal instrument of the 20th century. The first is the UN Charter. The second is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the third is that treaty, because without that treaty there'd be dozens of nuclear weapon states, rendering every regional conflict an existential threat for all of us. Now that treaty had within it a provision that after 25 years it would either be extended indefinitely, terminated, or extended for a period of time, and it was agreed by the nuclear weapon states and over 180 other nations to extend it indefinitely based on a promise that there would be progress on disarmament. And we looked at this situation, a group of us, and 8 different NGOs, some of them as networks of NGOs, civil society organizations like the International Peace Bureau, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, Nobel Peace Laureate Organization, Pugwash, Nobel Peace Laureate Organization, International Association of Lawyers. 8 of us got together and said, what can we do to strengthen the process? We strategized. And we said, well, you have 5 countries that are intransigent in progress on the subject. The P5, the United States, France, Russia, China, and the United Kingdom. And then you have the vast number of countries in the world, the non-aligned countries, demanding immediate abolition of nuclear weapons. So you had this absolutist demand with the absolute intransigence of the countries with nuclear weapons. We said, we see a natural alliance of middle power countries, countries that have reasonably good records on human rights, that rely on the rule of law for their security because they don't have massive militaries, and care about their people. So we formed the Middle Powers Initiative. And eventually we had we maybe had 30 conferences. We had 3 conferences. We started out just doing grassroots, and then we met with former President Jimmy Carter. He loved the idea. He said, come to the Carter Center. And he co-chaired these conferences. We had over 30 countries at a high diplomatic level and helped develop programs which were adopted by over 190 countries. Now, the problem we're facing today is the authoritarian leaders of countries don't seem to respect the legal obligations of their countries. So that's a very serious problem. If we don't solve that, everything's over. We have to solve the problem of authoritarian lawlessness. Because otherwise, treaties, promises fall apart, trust breaks down, and bullets become verbs. That's the biggest problem we face. We have to solve that. Presuming that we will be able, if we don't solve that, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Because the way authoritarians work is they stimulate the amygdala, the fear part of our brain, which allows them to subvert reason, and they do it all over the world by just stimulating fear and divisiveness, which renders treaties and cooperation and everything that we care about moot. Presuming that we will be able to get back on track with the major countries, we need to prepare for the steps needed to get to a safer world. So I'm pleased to say that in the process, the Middle Powers Initiative helped stimulate 13 practical steps in 2000, the moratorium on testing nuclear weapons, strengthening international atomic energy safeguards, and our motto was, what are steps that will reduce no country's security, that will enhance security, that will enhance international cooperation and law, that will build trust and will institutionalize progress. And I'm pleased to say in 2010, 60 more steps were agreed upon. In other words, the roadmap to a safer world is there. It got subverted by this process of authoritarianism, and that's another subject that we cannot ignore. But the vast majority of countries, the vast majority of people actually believe that cooperation is possible and necessary. And I just saw an example of a group of us got together and instituted a process that ended up with 3 conferences with the former president of the United States, and he gave us the Carter Center at no cost. And we had the convening capacity to bring together the players. But we didn't start out that way. We started out very much like this. And in the process, some of the countries of the world said, the New Agenda Coalition was created with South Africa, Sweden, Mexico, Brazil. Countries like the idea that this civil society group came up with. So it was grassroots and it was expertise, and it was successful. So I just say I've seen other examples of that kind of success, particularly in the climate, in advancing responsible climate policy. So the point that I'm making is there's examples of success, but what we haven't seen is the coalition of all of the different virtuous initiatives, which is the vast majority of people on the planet. And that would be a huge value added that I think is very realistic if we could get some energy of a secretariat with the resources to just do the task.
In fact, the approach that we are taking in the peace offensive is to look at with a problem-solving approach and a localized intervention. I mean, try to not to create, to solve all problems at once, but to really direct our operations to what is feasible, where we may have a good entry point and an added value to offer. So then, you can do 1 + 1 + 1 and reach also a certain level of impact that is, of course, very important. Now, we will have a second round, but I know that Igor is also preparing for questions from the floor and questions from all those who are online that are following this debate. So please, anybody that has questions, Igor, just please give me a sign anytime you have a question or you see that people want to ask a question. I think that for young people in particular, this is, in my opinion, a great opportunity also to understand how better they can try to influence processes, how themselves they can be actors of change in one way or another. So maybe you have questions for our experts in this direction. I would have a question in terms of what can we do at social level in order to be really a stimulant to counter-fight also this disenchantment that obviously people feel, the fact that lots of efforts have not achieved results. So what can we do to entice people to come forward, and what kind of collective representation can we not necessarily shape, but can we bring together? Whoever wants to intervene, Thania.
Yeah, let me go. So I think there's 3 things that I think the peace offensive can do. And then let me elaborate on one of them. The first one is what you said. I call it critical convenings. And I think Maribor is perfectly placed for that.
Yep.
And connecting also with other spaces. Critical convening is not just bringing people together that talk together all the time.
With a goal.
We need to break the expert circles and really mix up researchers, but from different strands. Just yesterday during dinner, I talked to the colleagues from neuroscience and medical, and there's so much we can learn from each other for a common cause. Bringing different researchers together, but also bringing the business community in, people and all this, and providing the space and nailing down the topics that matter. We cannot talk about everything. We need to be focused on what is the change agenda. That's number one. Number two is mobilization. And here we talked a lot about artificial intelligence, but we haven't talked about how do we mobilize young people in using it for a good cause. So that means also how can we mobilize on the one hand what you said, Jonathan, bringing all those different conversations and networks together that are already doing things because they don't have a common space, an intentional space. But the mobilization, in my view, has to also go through social media. We talked about, I think we should have a very cool Instagram campaign. We can have a YouTube channel that not talks about how military games end wars, but how peace is possible, and make a cool cartoon, a Muppet show. There's so many things that can be done, but there needs to be, peace needs to be cool. If peace is not cool, you don't get and mobilize young people. So we cannot only talk to those we have convinced. Then I come to what's the role of science. That's for me the third element. And I have 4 points what I think what science can do to peace, and what I've done basically all my career. And I start with Hannah Arendt, who I think made an important statement, and she said, in times of crisis, there is a responsibility of the intellectuals. I've written about turning this around into responsible scholarship. So what is responsible scholarships in times of crisis? Number one, it is basic research. What is basic research? Asking the right research questions. Why is that not changing the world? Simple. Number one, the funding structures we have in research are counterproductive to collaborative action. They produce a lot of PhDs and postdocs and single studies that are all maybe relevant, but they don't make a joint picture because they're all doing their little things. So we have Horizon projects in the EU that fund collaborative action, but everybody, every Horizon I have been taking part, everybody has tried to make sure they sit in their compartments. And then somebody else unites everything. The second problem is in research. I've worked for the EU, the UN, for governments, and I have seen how the value of research has not been used. Why? Because the system works like that. You have a major research project that maybe has a lot of answers. It's then presented in outreach activities. Who's sitting there? People say, we had the European Union, the World Bank, they were all there. But who's there from these institutions? It's usually the research department. Basically, the people are not important. The people are not communicating anything to the country desks, to the policy desks. So if you don't understand how the system functions of policy making, you can't make policy change. So that's why I all encourage you, do as many internships as possible and understand it. The second role of research is what I call translational research, and where medical science has really advanced because they understood there is a gap between fundamental research and what the patients need. In peace, we are not even having something like translational research. I've done this like a lot, and I'll give you an example. What does translational research look like? You take results, like we had, for example, a massive project over 5 years with 25 universities on the role of civil society and people in peace processes. Such a big book, won a couple of prizes. Why? Not only because of the evidence, but also because we managed to translate it into guidelines for policy as number one. So we informed like about 20 UN resolutions, EU statements, God name it. They all made it into these guidelines. But who's following guidelines? We don't know. That brings me to the third role, which I call evidence-based support to peace processes. Very concretely speaking, taking the evidence that is there and directly, basically advising in processes. Concrete example, in the Colombian peace process, I worked with the ELN, one of the listed terrorist groups in brackets. We don't like the word terrorists because Nelson Mandela was a terrorist too. Who was a terrorist? Just name the groups. So this was one group that was fighting for actually the rights of oppressed indigenous voices, very rare species these days, but they were also using terroristic acts and armed conflict. And we advised them on how do you move from your armed struggle to the peace negotiation table. How we did that, I was with them in the bush in Colombia, and my research team basically provided me every night, time worked for us, with the latest evidence on the questions they had, how to structure the process, how to get more participation in, how to do this, how to work on the resistances. And I took the research results and just gave them ideas. Say, you don't have to do it like other people did it, but here's ideas, here's what worked in these places, and we jointly structured a peace strategy. What happened is, you cannot just go to the bush in Colombia without having the okay from the government, of course. I worked a lot with the Norwegian and the Swiss government to facilitate that process. Then the government said, but we insist on a debriefing. So I said, but I can't tell you what I have discussed with your opponent, but I can share some ideas. And they said, sure. So I shared ideas with the government, which then ended up the government and the guerrilla group together, basically building a plan based on the research ideas we had. Then I was invited by the government to advise them. They had a referendum. It was quite a famous referendum. It's one of the first referendum of a peace process that failed. So I was invited 6 months before the referendum to bring them comparative evidence on referenda. And I said, okay, this is the knowledge we have on peace referendum and democracy referendum, and all the conditions you have in Colombia show that this referendum will be lost. And they said, no, you just don't get Colombia. I say, I wish you well, but I'm just comparing the conditions you have are more built on hope than on reality. So of course they were a little bit like not so happy, sent me back. The referendum was lost. The day the referendum was lost, they said to me, board a plane and come here, we need you. So then they said, what are we doing after a lost referendum? And I said, there's no evidence. Because we have only 2 cases of a referendum that was lost. That was Cyprus and Colombia. So let's broaden our scope of evidence to democratic referenda that failed. And the result was that if you don't instantly start new coalition building, if you don't make a sham offensive to the population, if you don't unite movements and say, we are still for peace, it's gonna fail. The whole process is gonna collapse. That's the evidence we have. So then, after I said this, I was invited to the office of the president. And they said, we don't know who you are, but somebody said you have some important, interesting things to say. So I stood there on a flip chart and said, okay, research shows us A, B, C, D, E, F, G, which means not existing here, you're gonna fail. If you not wanna fail, research shows us you can do A, B, C, D, E, and they said, okay. And the president toured the country and made a sham offensive to the opposition, and they rewrote the peace agreement. So I think we can see that research can do a lot if it's intentional and is not afraid of reality. We don't need to be afraid of reality. Thank you.
I would like to give the floor to Igor. Igor, you have questions from the floor?
To share some stories about
any
Santos.
question? Because
what I would like to inform you that we have 10 to 15 minutes for the discussion, and I asked the students, are there any questions?
Or comments?
Not students or comments? Not students, but the lady. Please just wait for the microphone. The lady in red, just a moment.
Thank you very much for all new informations that you gave us, all participants. But I missed something. You spoke about peace. Peace has so different faces. Frau Paffenholz, Mrs. Paffenholz, you spoke about your engagement in South America. But for example, peace of a mother in Colombia is quite another peace as my peace with my children. And you only mentioned that you are the only woman here in this part. I'm sorry to hear that. And another, my remark. You know that peace is after the Second World War was built from a generation so-called veterans, and also the generation baby boomers. Our work to do is how to educate it, not our children, but also generations to come, what peace in every day means, not only in high diplomacy and high politics, which is very important. But I'm living here. I'm living with the youth, with our students, who are very active every day to ensure peace in the classroom, in the community. And I'm sure this is very important. But in this unpredictable world, I returned last week from the Far East and made a very huge excursion what peace is. Peace in Iran, in Tehran, is quite another thing as peace in Germany or United Kingdom. And also, I'm sorry to say, in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Would we have other?
Any other comments, especially about the students? Male or female, it doesn't make any difference. No? We have a question via email. Well, because it was mentioned science diplomacy. How do you see the impact of the COVID crisis on how the world could solve common problems? Is this a positive or a rather negative example of how to do it?
The impact of
the COVID crisis.
COVID, yes.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yeah, so the COVID crisis, when the COVID crisis happened, is this on? Yeah, there we go. I wrote an article for Newsweek magazine, and I pointed out, pardon? And I pointed out that viruses don't carry passports. And that this was an opportunity for the world to come together to promote human security and not to view addressing the crisis from a national level.
You would be next.
If you deal with a pandemic only at national, if you deal with a pandemic only... Hello? There we go. If you deal with a pandemic only at a national level, there will be pandemics in the future, and if we don't have a global system to address it, the pandemic will go in a particular region, mutate, and come back even more virulent than when it began, because viruses are actually kind of smart. So I wrote about how this is our opportunity to focus on human security. Human security is a way of looking at security based on people's actual needs, focusing first and foremost on the security of the person. So the United Nations contacted me, the Japanese funded a human security trust. So there's an entire department at the United Nations focused on promoting human security. And they contacted me. I'm the president of a relatively small NGO, Global Security Institute, and they said, can you help us mainstream this concept? And I said, no, I can't. I don't have the resources, but I'm part of an organization that does, the World Academy of Art and Science. And I brought it to this organization, and it said, great idea, we can do this. Now, one of the trustees of it knew somebody who was part of the Consumer Technology Association's conference that takes place each year in Las Vegas with all the top companies that make the digital world we live in. I mean, all of them are there, and all of the decision makers from the leading countries of the world on the subject of cyber world, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars. I would list the past, when we went to a bicycle that can rise up in the air and fly around, all the high tech. And we met with them and they said, we're going to make human security a central theme of the largest technology conference in the world. So there was a straight line between an idea that one person had, me, writing an article, and then leveraging it, and now all of a sudden, All of the major corporations dealing with high tech are aware, mainstream, of this idea. And I tell this to you as students to realize, and I mentioned about the interfaith movement beginning with one person, never think that an idea doesn't have power in and of itself. And that if you have a good idea that resonates because it's true and because it's virtuous, find a group of people to discuss it and see if they can leverage it in the world that you're living in. I started out when I was a student actively engaging with small groups of other students with ideas that we thought were relevant to our life going forward. And I learned how to do that by addressing issues that were of a local concern where I was. And I've applied the same technique and seen how a good idea can be leveraged if you really own it. And that's what I'm urging you as students to try to do. Learn the skills by working together on a project that you know is of authentic concern to you and how you can make the good idea to solve it grow.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thania, would you like to make a very short comment, very short comment to the comment we received?
Yes, thank you very much for your comment. Very, very essential what you said. I'm working with some colleagues on a project called Pieces of Peace, to acknowledge actually that peace is not universal. The universal thrive is universal, but people have so many different needs. The other thing is the everyday peace in education is so important. And when I lived in Geneva, we had this essay and then video competition among schools, like to say, what is peace for you? And the kids, like from 9 to 14, produced amazing videos, and it was all about inclusion. It was all about how do we live together with our differences, and it was beautiful. And I think to encourage these kind of things, use education and let people over the years find out what is it what they can contribute to peace, but not just peace is so abstract. Be concrete. What do people mean by it? And very often it winds down to creating inclusive societies where you have differences and can still live together. And I think education is key. And there has been a huge study years ago from the University of Birmingham on education and conflict. And it showed that no matter which country, even in like European countries, the system of education, that was one of the findings, is actually supporting conflict and not peace. The way competition is dealt with, the way hierarchies are dealt with. So we have basically the wrong institutional setups for creating peaceful citizens. So that's this. And then peace education has been a subject on the side. You can choose between theater, football, and peace education. I mean, it should be mainstreamed. Thank you.
We have one question, and then I'll give the floor to Paul because he has some conclusive, let's say, not remarks, but suggestions in terms of how to bring the peace offensive forward. So if we have a question from the floor, please, Igor.
Thank you. My name is Yuri Zoplak. It was a fascinating panel, but we have here hundreds of students here in the hall and watching online. I would ask you for the end to give one piece of advice to young people, something they will remember. Thank you.
This is a fantastic question. I will keep it, if you allow me to, for the very end, because before I would like to give the floor to Paul for, to wrap up a bit the suggestions that we have for the rollout of the peace offensive. Then I think we will come to that, and each of us here will attempt to give an advice. And I think that is fundamentally important for the future also of our initiative. Thank you, Paul.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if it's a wrap-up, but it's a few thoughts.
Additional thoughts,
about
yes.
What could be done.
Yeah.
So in terms of preparation, I think, as Thania knows well, whenever you think you have an idea, it's good to do a mapping and figure out what others are already doing, to make sure that it's not duplicative and doesn't undermine what other actors are already doing. And in the peacemaking world, you know, there's a whole industry of people with goodwill and with good ideas, and there's a lot of things happening, and it's important to find a niche and to figure out what's not being done or what's not being adequately done, and then to go for it. So that's just the first thing about preparation and just doing a proper analysis of what's going on already. And then in terms of actually getting moving, I think that maybe it's a good idea if the peace offensive thinks of getting involved in certain conflicts and doing useful things in certain contexts, then to be a place where an assessment is made of demand and supply. So demand means, is there a need for the idea that the peace offensive has? And does it have the supply, does it have the expertise and the know-how and the experience, which I believe, at least in the scientific realm, it has an abundance of such expertise and know-how. But anyway, this idea of assessing needs and demands and availability of the expertise, I think it's an important function for the Peace Offensive Center. And then, you know, just to finally prove that I've been listening and learning this morning, I want to recall something that Professor Emery was saying, because I found it very interesting, the framing where he explained that you know, inventions don't come from thin air and from a vacuum, but they, you know, they're preceded by experimentation and reflection. And so I totally agree. And the experimentation, the reflection increases the probability that you will come up with a good invention. And so I think the Peace Offensive Center could be, in tying back a little bit to what Thania said, could be a place for that experimentation and for that reflection, and also that sort of innovation community that Professor Emery was talking about, to bring different types of stakeholders together and formulate, you know, what are the problems and what are the entry points and what are the potential solutions. So I think that those things are a little bit vague for now, but I think these functions could be part of the work of the Peace Offensive Center. Yeah.
Definitely they are and they will be. As you know, we also have this diagnostic tool that we have elaborated to represent reality and to also help transforming realities in due process. Now, I think the question of Professor Yuri Toplak comes very nicely at the conclusion of this debate, because the Peace Offensive is exactly about engaging people, engaging youth. I mean, to transform reality and to make it better. So the question is, what does it take from you? What is the piece of advice, as Yuri was saying, that we can offer? Shall we start really with 2 words? Please, let's be as synthetic as possible in this response, because only a few words can be retained at the end, and I think that we have to be catchy and on the spot in this particular case. Jonathan?
The heart without the hand will degrade into mere sentiment. Everything begins with the heart of your humanity. Everything begins there, in your life, in your career. Whatever you do every day has to be in accord with what you are as a human being. Everything begins there. And if you don't bring it into action, it degrades into just mere sentiment, which leads to cynicism and ill health, actually, dis-ease in your life. So first is to find the core values that you have to move from what is to what ought to be. That's what the journey of life is to bring love and compassion and goodness into action. It doesn't matter what you're doing, there's always opportunities. And then I would say the hand without the heart's really dangerous. That human beings who are not guided by conscience become very dangerous creatures because our capacity to impact one another is enormous. But when the conscience of the heart is brought into action, transformation occurs. And a motto that I use for that transformation every day for me, my background is law, so I practiced law and I was passionate about bringing justice into the world. That was a driving force for me, and there was a way to do that. So I tried to develop skills that would be in accord with my values. So if you're in the healing profession, or if you're in the education profession, or if you're in the profession of science, you develop the skills in accord with your character. So love people, use things, never love things and use people. Love people and use things, and your intelligence that you're learning are things that you can use. So learn skills that are of service and bring it into action. By doing that, you'll want to join with other people, and one of the things that everybody wants is inner peace. If you want inner peace, bring your conscience into action and you'll get inner peace.
I'll be brief, Maribor. So, advice to students. Number one, don't let yourself rule by fear. Don't be afraid of the future. Don't be afraid of insecurity. Don't be afraid of the job market. Because number two, believe in yourself. Follow your passion. Because if you follow your passion, everything else will follow. Number three, always think about why you're here on this planet. What you, as a person, can contribute to humanity, no matter where you are, in which profession. You have a unique talent to contribute to humanity in whatever position you are, and use it wisely.
Well, I just ran out of time, so I better be really quick. 2 words for the students: curiosity and engagement. So it's one thing to be good at essays and examinations and get good grades, but really what I guess if you look at recruitment, for example, what recruiters often look at is whether you've gone out there and done things sort of extracurricular, gone and explored and tried different things and, you know, written a blog, volunteered in a developing country, these kind of things. So I would just say whoever's up for it, be curious about the world and then demonstrate your curiosity by actually going and doing it and engaging. I think that's important.
So someone said that human mind is like a parachute. It works only when it's open. And, you know, so I really feel that you should keep your mind open. This is the most important thing. Curiosity, passion, but most important, go against the wind. Never follow the crowd. Never follow the crowd. Always ask yourself, why are they going that direction? Is there another direction I can pursue? And what the other thinks about that? Always have a contradictory kind of analysis. This is essential in life. Critical thinking. And with these words, I close it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a great panel, and I got the idea why Mr. Kiniger-Pasidi actually used this phrase, take 2 words, because he knows that actually the name of the city of Maribor consists of 2 words. It was actually created, invented, because in 150 years ago, a little bit more, it was only the German name for the city, Marburg. So a poet actually created a new Slovenian name for this city. Maribor. So he took Mar, which means care, and Bor, fight, which is probably what you said. You have to care and then you have to act. So that's why Maribor is a great place as the home of peace offensive. It is perhaps too late to reframe it in Miribor, but anyway, Maribor is also okay. So thank you very much to the panel, and thank you very much for your kind attention.